So you've done a lot of work and research into different cults and things. Which are scarier to you, cults or journalists?
It's the same thing, isn't it? I think. And I mean that as well. It's look, I don't know. We were talking before, weren't we, about we're just a bunch of people floating about. We're just idiots, and none of us know what we're doing, and then we die.
It's very true. You just described my daily life, basically.
We're just so influenced by stuff, and we don't know that we are. And I think that's what the journalism is, and that is what being in a cult is as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about that. What cults have you looked into?
So on my podcast, I think I've tried to do all of them. One I hadn't done was like the Moonies. I don't know much about the Moonies, but yeah, they're coming up soon. Mm-hmm. But so far, I mean, my first ever episode. I mean, the reason I started the podcast was because of this whole thing. I couldn't get my documentaries on TV anymore. And at some point, especially once the whole COVID thing happened, I was sitting there like, well, I've got all these contacts now. Why don't I just interview them myself and put it out there to the world? And luckily, it started taking off. At least the audio version did. And now the YouTube version is starting to. But my first ever episode was a former Westboro Baptist Church member, the son of the founder. Yeah. So that was like a baptism of fire, so to speak. So they're just nuts. And then, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Scientologists. Nixium cult was an interesting one. Hasidic Jews, I find them really interesting because I know a lot of people who haven't met a lot of Jewish people. They think that everyone either wears like the little hat that Ben Shapiro's got, or they're like these Orthodox people who are like really, really Orthodox. And most of us are not like that. But those guys are really interesting to me, and they can be horrible. And extreme Muslims, I've done quite a few times, and as you can imagine, that's not gone down that well with a lot of people. But you've got to do all of them, don't you?
Yeah, I would think so. So how do you define a cult exactly?
I think there is no consensus, and I can feel people listening now in my head. I'm not imaginary people in my head, but people listening to this channel, thinking like that they have their preconceptions of what a cult is, and they go, "No, this is it. That's it." I just had Amanda Montell on, who's like a cult expert, and her father was in a cult, and she talks a lot about cults. And her consensus, she says there is no consensus really about what is a cult. Even the word's etymology is really, really obscure. No one's quite sure. And it's long been used as just basically a synonym for religion, but that's an insulting one. You could say that's your religion, and someone says, no, that's a cult. It's an insult. And she talks about something really, really interesting to me, which is that, we think of, either, I guess we think of religions or we think of like Nixium, multi-level marketing maybe. But there are so many other kinds of cults, from fitness gurus, right, to like jumbo juice people. And I think you can be I've heard there's a cult of one if you're somebody who can be quite cultish about yourself. Not that I exactly know what that means. So I would say it's, rather than something being a cult or not, I think it's really on a spectrum. And maybe like the Heaven's Gate cult, which is a fascinating one, because those guys killed themselves because they thought they were going to meet aliens in a higher plane or something. And then there's like obviously Jonestown. So those are like a 10 out of 10. And then maybe like a 3 out of 10 is some sort of fitness guru down the road from your office or whatever. And it's not bad to have a 3 out of 10 cult, to be in one. They're not ruining your life like the 10 out of 10 one is. So it's just about how much control they have over you. And one of the things that Amanda Montell says that I really liked as advice for people who are in cults, and if they feel like they might be in some sort of cult, it's not to go away from cults. It's not to lean away from them, as you might imagine. It's actually to start getting involved in lots of cults. So rather than
a diversity of cult.
Exactly. If you've got loads of cults, then it's like if one of them goes bust, if one of them goes crazy, which inevitably it happens when you've got some sort of guru leading a group of people, then at least you've got lots of other things going on. And that recently happened with Lloyd Evans of the Jehovah's Witness, the ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and I got quite heavily involved in all that. Lloyd Evans is one of the top sort of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. So you get all these people who've just left Jehovah's Witnesses, which is quite an extreme cult, I would say. They leave that and they go to him, and then he becomes a cult. So it's a bit like, what's that drug that people have when they get off of, H or whatever, like methadone or something?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
It's sort of, you're getting off Jehovah's Witnesses and you're getting onto the ex-Jehovah's Witness cult, It's kind of like addictions. Usually they just change forms. So like people who are like really overweight, they're addicted to food, and then they decide to lose the weight, and then they get addicted to the gym, and it's just like the addiction hasn't gone away. They just shifted the focus of the addiction. Exactly that is, yeah. And it's that's usually like impulsive people. I've got a friend who is an alcoholic and he's given up that. And it's like every second there's like coffee in his mouth. There's like his hands are doing things. He's just constantly, some people are quite impulsive like that. With the Lloyd Evans one in particular, it was really interesting for me to see because a lot of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses follow my channel, which is interesting for me because I never knew anything about them before I started the channel. And they're all really lovely, nice people. And they spoke to me about it while this was happening because this Lloyd Evans, basically the head of the ex-Jehovah's Witness group, or one of the heads, so, one of the top guys, was found to have been having, affairs, extramarital affairs with sex workers, despite sort of preaching all the time about not doing that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And they took it really hard, the ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. They were just in bits about it. They were emotionally wrecked. And that was really interesting for me because for me, it was like, okay, they're following this YouTube channel and that's it. But no, that, to me, that was a sign that it was a bit cultish.
One of the things I've really learned from being on YouTube is people really do get very deeply emotional about these things. And it's like, you almost have to be very mindful when you're making content about how it is going to impact people emotionally. And I never try to allow that to dictate the content that I make because I want to do what I want to do. But it is something that is a weird thing that all of a sudden you have 100 comments from people saying, how dare you do this? It is horrible that you covered this thing. And I'm like, I just made a video talking about the news. Like, relax, calm down. But you can't say that because they don't want to listen. So you've looked at all sorts of types of cults. I think so one of the things about Heaven's Gate for me that was really interesting, and it kind of coincides with the woke, is and correct me if I'm wrong because I've only watched the HBO documentary on this. But they tried to get rid of gender, didn't they?
You might be right. I don't actually know about that, but it doesn't surprise me. I know they changed the names of everybody, and everybody. It wouldn't. Another interesting one on the same lines is the Jonestown massacre, because his whole thing, Jim Jones, was about eradicating racial disparities and stuff. And what he would do is preach loads of woke stuff, what we would call woke now, about equality, but he also had sort of an internal harem of women who were all white to be his sort of sex slaves and stuff like that. So in practice, he actually was a bit of a racist, and his preaching was all about equality. So he's a perfect example of a dark triad, wokey person.
Have you found any cults yet that don't involve sex abuse or some sort of sex-related scandal?
Well, again, it depends how extreme on the top, out of 10 it is, right? But I think Karlin Borisenko is a cult, right? To an extent.
I literally have been told that I'm a cult leader and I manipulate. They've actually been talking about it in the chat. They're like, Karlin, tell him about our cult, because we get accused of being a cult and I get accused of being a cult leader all the time. Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting, and it's interesting they say that. And look, as a linguist, I'm always thinking about language, right? And language, I asked a linguist, what was her name? Lera Boroditsky. She's fantastic, and really knowledgeable about language, although she is a bit woke, actually, so maybe don't look her up. No. But she's really good. And I said to her, what is language? And she said, language is manipulation. That is what language is for. It's why we have it. You have it so you can say to someone, hey, can you do this? That's what can you get me some drink, mum? That's how it starts. So you are manipulating your audience every time you speak to them. You are giving them your opinions. They are looking up to you. You're not a 10 out of 10 cult, but like me, you are a cult. And I recently did a 30-day YouTube video course because, as I was saying, my audio podcast took off, and YouTube, I wasn't with it. I've got this nice camera now and all that stuff, so I'm getting into the YouTube, and I thought I'll do this course, and it was expensive. And, well, not that expensive, but it was expensive for me. And it did, each day was a new title. And first it started with thumbnails, get your thumbnails good and all that stuff. Soon it went into sacred words. You've got to have certain words that you say at the beginning and end. Rituals, certain rituals. Icons, you've got to have an icon. That's another day, right? Learning all about the kinds of icons. Well, look behind me. I've got the lights, right? Those are my icons. You'll recognize. You see that, immediately it's me. And then there was even stuff one day was non-believers. So you've got to create non-believers. And I have seen it on YouTuber after YouTuber. Once I read that, I saw on so many, it was they created enemies. And sometimes they do it. I'm not suggesting they're that manipulative. I think we all do it naturally in a sense. I'm on a guy called Sean Atwood's show on Wednesdays, and he's amazing. He's one of the best people I've ever met. And I co-host his show on Wednesdays. I'm very fortunate that he gets me to do that. And once I remember the internet went down and it stopped working for a second. And we got it going back again. And it was just me and him in this, the green room before going back on. And he's going, they're taking us down, man. It's YouTube again. And I was like, mate, it was the internet. And he's like, it's YouTube. They're against us. And he's creating in his mind a non-believer. And that's just between me and him. Then we go on and he's telling all the listeners as well, the viewers, YouTube have taken us down. They won't get away with it. And it's the non-believer. So that is essentially what YouTube is. It's essentially what most businesses are. I mean, all those things apply for, anyone listening now. Take those things in mind. If you want your business to do well, get a bit culty about it.
Speaking of which, guys, if you haven't mounted that like button yet, now might be the time to mount it, or do whatever you want to. We can do whatever we want to the like button on this channel, Andrew. Just so you know, if you have feelings about the like button, you can do whatever you want to it as well. Whether you want to caress it or okay, we're gonna stop there. Okay,
like it. Click like. Everyone click like. Sign up to Carlin's book stuff, and so you can talk to her on Zoom as well.
Absolutely do that. That's the best thing to do. So okay, so would you say that but the higher level on the spectrum a cult gets in terms of like being closer to like an 8 or a 9 or a 10 out of 10, like is there usually sexual stuff going on?
Yes. Yeah, I'm thinking of certain ones. Yes, yeah. I mean, Nixium was a really good example. Do you know much about Nixium?
I do know a little bit about it, yeah.
Madness. And I spoke to someone called Kelly Thiel on my podcast about Nixium. She was in it. And it was, I guess you know already, but for anyone who doesn't, it was basically, they disguised themselves as a multi-level marketing platform, which is like a really bad disguise for a cult because it's like, it's a synonym basically for cult. And he did this thing, he had this inner circle. He would teach, basically, they were supposed to teach people about sort of like, life affirming lessons and how to be charitable and how to be happy and all this kind of thing, very similar to Scientology. And like Scientology, a lot of the stuff is held back from you. That's how the cults work. They use all this cultish language. They do love bombing at the beginning, which is just telling you how wonderful you are, which to a certain kind of person who doesn't, I don't know, certain people respond to that. It feels fantastic. I'd love people telling me nice things.
That was what the conservatives did to me when I first went to that Trump rally and my article went viral. I got loved. I was like the conservative darling for a month and a half. So I totally understand it. It's really nice. It's fun. It feels good.
Imagine that. Imagine being, if I'm a big conservative and then I see you writing that thing, I was the other thing and now I'm on this thing. I would love you as well. If I love, I'm a big football fan. And if a player who's on the other team and he's always against my team, but then he's like, actually, your team's better. I'd love that person. But yeah, so Keith Raniere, the guy who did Nixium, he had this inner sanctum called DOS, which is like MS-DOS, if you remember that, but it stood for something else that was weird. And people, to get in there, you had to like progress to a certain level, like Scientology, and that's where all the big information was. He was like, you get to this level, that's when you're going to get all the secrets to happiness and joy. And just to get in there, you have to give collateral, they called it, a monthly collateral, which was saying basically, and it was Alison Mack, who was the actress from Smallville, which is a really strange, no one expected that because she has this really angelic face. She just looks so nice and sweet and lovely.
Perfect recruiter.
Perfect. And she was like going around getting everybody's collateral. And there were emails out there of her just, hey, give me your monthly collateral. And that meant you had to say, right, well, my husband's been having an affair with so-and-so. Here are some photos of my husband's penis, or like photos, emails, anything like that is insanely secret. And that if it got out there, your life would be ruined. You had to send that monthly to them, or just like, just mad. And people's just started, they even said you can make it up. Like, you can make it up if you want, as long as we have evidence that you've written that your husband did a horrible thing, your son did this or that at school. And then they were in. And then once they were in, they got branded with hot poker irons.
That's the craziest piece of this whole thing, is the branding. And it was Alison Mack's and Keith's initials.
Yes. Yeah. So it was supposed to be a symbol that from like, some weird old symbol, and no one realized until they turned it sideways. And you're right. It was their initials. Creepy. And then they realized that they were in a sex cult. They became Keith Raniere's sex trafficking sex slaves.
Do you have any sense of how people get sucked in, like previously normal people getting sucked into these cults just to do absurd and crazy things? Because, I've watched a couple documentaries about Nixium, and it seems to me that these women were just like average women. Like they had it together. It wasn't, there was nothing, they weren't like antisocial. It didn't seem like they had anything, they didn't have mental health issues so far as I understood. It was just they ended up in this place where they're literally laying naked on a table being branded. Like what happened?
I think it's a sense of purpose, and Nixium's a really good one to look at because it was a lot of sort of high society people. That's why, and it's similar to Scientology. Obviously, Keith Raniere, the chief of Nixium, had done his homework on Scientology, and it was about attracting these like top people. So he even had like Richard Branson, the entrepreneur, coming to his classes. He had the Dalai Lama endorse him, and there were pictures of them together. And Dalai Lama saying, "You're fantastic." So it was all about like high society stuff. And I think there are, particularly with, I sort of worry about saying it, but there's a particular kind of maybe middle upper class woman with maybe a rich husband who's off doing all these different kinds of things, and they need purpose, and they are looking for any kind of purpose, often getting involved in charitable movements and stuff like that. You know, East Coast, West Coast kind of thing. And so it gives them some sort of purpose. And they've not had all that love bombing and stuff before. They, you know, most of us haven't. But I think it is that sort of lack of purpose, and they're going into things and maybe they're a bit innocent and a bit looking for different things, and they don't have enough of those community things in their lives. And they're not meant, some of us I think are meant to be, we were discussing this before, we're meant to be quite individual. And I guess we're less likely to be sucked into cults and cult thinking. But I guess these people were. What do you think?
I mean, I think that, you know, I don't know what draws people to it, but I have actually thought a lot about what prevented me from becoming woke when everyone around me became woke. And, you know, because I feel like I was very susceptible to it. I mean, like I said, like I told you earlier, I was a Democrat for 20 years. I was a true believer Democrat. I was like, vote blue no matter who. I basically I got into politics really aggressively when George W. Bush was in office because I hated him so much. And then as soon as Barack Obama got elected, I was like, whew, okay, I don't need to worry about this anymore. It's being taken care of now. The Democrats control things. I can shut my brain off. And when Donald Trump got elected president, I cried. I had moments where I was extremely upset. I didn't see it coming. And it really did kind of like dismantle my entire worldview. And at that time, basically everyone around me just started getting sucked into this, like, we hate Trump. He's the most evil person that has ever existed, ever, a racist, a misogynist, whatever. And I basically, like a week after the election in 2016, I went, where did I go? Peru. That's where I went. I was like, I knew, like you said, Portugal, or I was like, oh my God, or Paraguay. I was like, I was confusing. I went to Peru to do ayahuasca on a mountaintop for like a week and a half. And that was pretty great. And so, but I basically, like, I threw myself into like spirituality because I was like, okay, this crazy things happen in the world. And I kind of talked myself up in my head. I was like, Trump's going to ruin everything. He's going to destroy the economy. I've just got my business going, whatever. But I really thought I was going to lose a lot of money just because I thought Trump was going to destroy the economy. And then I went off and I did all this spiritual work. And I said, you know what? I can do everything I want to do. I've got the power to make my life whatever I want to make it. And I really think that that piece is what saved me from getting sucked into the woke cult, because I had a higher purpose. I was serving people in the way I wanted to do it with my organizational psychology practice. I was writing a book about mindfulness. And so I feel like I had that purpose and direction elsewhere. And I also had, I think, a belief in something bigger than myself, which I think is important. And I think even people who are atheists can have a belief in something that's bigger of themselves. But I was basically like, you know what? Everything happens for a reason. Trump is supposed to be president for whatever reason that's supposed to be. And, you know, the country's probably going to be fine. And so I feel like I had a different perspective than a lot of my friends did, who just instantly, like, they started just bonding with each other over a shared hatred of this person. And I think that that's honestly one of the scariest things I've seen. And as someone who now has a whole bunch of people online who bond themselves together over a shared hatred of me, I look at them and I go, you are absolutely nuts. So I don't know. It's like people need, I think you're right in that people like need something to focus their energy and attention on, that you're going to focus your energy on something. And it's either going to be something in which you're creating and giving value to the world, or it's going to be something that's fundamentally destructive. and you kind of have to make the decision about which of those two things is true. I don't know if I just made all that up or if it makes sense.
No, I think you're spot on. The only thing I'd say at the end is just that it's always so subjective, isn't it? Because we're all just such righteous people. We all like, obviously we hear a lot from woke people, we're on the right side of history. That becomes very important. And that's what you'd call in cults, you'd call that a thought terminating idea or a thought terminating phrase. There were all these things that you'd say. I can't think of many off the top of my head, but you get them in all cults. They were just like ways to stop people asking questions. You can't challenge somebody who says, yeah, well, in the future, we're on the right side of history. You're like, it's like, okay, let's just not even have the conversation then. I often think about, when I was 18 at like university and going on a date with a girl or something like that. And when we all used to do that, like, what did we talk about? Because you feel like you're a grown up at 18. But you've literally been like away from your mummy looking after you for about a year. You were 14 4 years ago. I think Jordan Peterson said that, like points that out as well. You were you were a little boy or a little girl, literally like 4 years earlier. You've done nothing. So all you can talk about on a date is like your mum, your teachers at school, like football practice. There's nothing. And that's why you get, like, if you go to like the college dorms, and I'm sure you had this, we all had this, just like posters all around my room of different movies that somehow made me original. And it's like, okay, I don't have much background or personality or anything interesting to say for myself, but I can express my creativity through these people, and I can show these are the things that I support. I support Train Spotting and The Godfather, and that's my originality and my uniqueness, except that every other student has exactly the same posters in their rooms. As you get older, I think and this is partly why I think there's so much woke among younger people as well. I think as you get older, maybe you have more other interests in your life. And maybe you don't. Some people don't. They stick with. So that's what I think cults do to an extent. They give you, like, as you say, a higher power, but also they give you some sort of personality characteristic without having to do very much. And that's why woke people, or people who are just obsessed with anything. I mean, have you? I'm not talking about people who are moderates with any. You can be moderate about everything. But have you had a chat with like a friend who suddenly got really into Bitcoin, like really into it, or really into fitness, right? Oh, it can get very boring. But that person talks to other Bitcoiners or other fitness people or other Jehovah's Witnesses or other Scientologists about Scientology. I talk to my own vice in that sense is soccer, football, and I can sit there and I talk with all these people, and to an outsider, endlessly boring. But to us, it's like this community, and I don't have to be funny, charismatic. I don't have to have interesting life stories. It's just my opinion about that particular soccer player, and that's enough. So I think that's what cults gives people.
It's funny you say that, because you asked me earlier if I had like a cult or like a sports team or anything that I felt like I was a part of, and I couldn't think of anything at the time. But the way you just described it there, that is absolutely true of me with like libertarian internal infighting within the Libertarian Party, because it's fascinating. Like, there's so much drama. There's always a coup of some sort, or a takeover attempt, or people getting kicked out of the party, or like people sending out these crazy mailers, and it is constant every single day. And I feel like I'm constantly talking about it with my libertarian friends, and we're like, who said what on Twitter today? What's going on? And no one else cares.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's Dungeons and Dragons as well. It's like, and the identity thing, you've seen that before as well on Twitter. Like loads of people, I can't remember what yours is, so I don't want to insult you in case yours is like that. But loads of people, it's like, instead of listing like what they do or who they are, they're listing like the tribes to which they feel they belong. So it's like cisgender, trans. It's like something, like not just the trans stuff, but you know what I mean. And it's just like, I want to say to them, like, this is all stuff that is superfluous to me. If I met you in a park or in a job or at somewhere, you don't have to tell me which kind of person that you enjoy having sex with. You don't have to tell me which gender you want to. I could not be less interested. I want to know, what do you enjoy doing? Do you want to go for an excursion? Should we go for a walk? Should we watch the sunset? Not that I'm ever doing those things, but should we play sports? Should we watch a film? Like, do things. But I think maybe some people feel that they come up a little bit short in that area, and so they have to talk about the clubs they've joined. That's what it is.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that being part of like the woke cult, for lack of like a better term, I think it does offer people that sense of virtue. as
Yeah.
well. It's like I
Oh,
have to do this to be a good person, and
yeah.
if that's where they're getting their self-worth from and their self-esteem from, then of course they would become a part of that. And I mean, I said earlier today, I don't think that this is something they're going to grow out of at this point, just because I think it's just being constantly reinforced by their workplaces and by culture and stuff like that. But I mean, it is serving their life in some way. And if we can't get another way for them to fill the God-shaped hole in
Hmm.
themselves, to quote Jordan Peterson. I mean, I don't know what it is. I have a really hard time understanding. Well, I guess maybe here's the question. Have you discovered a process that people go through when they're kind of like waking up and leaving a cult in the course of your research?
Mm. Well, I mean, the thing is, often they're just led by another cult. So, I
Mm.
mean, if I take Jehovah's Witnesses as an example, it's that they start to see maybe a few videos from Lloyd Evans, and they get sucked into him. One of the things that, like, a friend of mine called Stephen Knight, who's got a podcast, he's a friend of Ricky Gervais's, which I always say because it's cool that I've got a friend who is a friend of Ricky Gervais. But he does like Godless Spell Checkers, his podcast, and he's an atheist, but he's very, very anti-woke and all that stuff.
That's a great title, Godless Spell Check.
Well, he got quite well known, and Ricky Gervais got to know him because he used to basically just go around if people spelt atheist wrong, because atheist is not that easy to spell. He would just check the spelling, and that was it. And that, one of those Twitter accounts that just does a particular thing, and then that was it. So, but he said to Lloyd Evans of the ex Jehovah's Witnesses, he said something like that because Lloyd Evans is also very, very woke, and Stephen Knight said to him, like, you guys leave one cult, which is Jehovah's Witnesses, and you join another one and Lloyd said he said to me later, when Stephen said that, he was very angry and he blocked him, and he said that is a terrible thing to say to somebody who's coming out of a cult, which I took as a thought terminating thing to say. Again, it was like, don't question me, don't tell us what we're doing, and that's an emotional thing for us, we can't talk about that. And that's the very thing he says he's trying to go against. So, I have a video I put out today on my YouTube channel with a Hasidic Jewish woman who grew up in the ultra-Orthodox cults. And for her, it was, again, a similar thing where she was just like listening to bits of, she managed to get Wi-Fi in her house, and like her husband didn't even know, which I love the idea that, because Wi-Fi is just going on all around them and he just doesn't know. And just hearing snippets of different lives and different things, and eventually you just go. But unfortunately, often they go woke, and that's to do with what you're talking about with the virtue stuff. It's a way of like, oh, okay, so maybe my Jehovah God thing doesn't exist, but how else am I going to seem really, really righteous and tell other people that they're bad and I'm good? And woke is perfect for that.
So you're saying that we need to create an anti-woke cult to lure them into that will give them a false sense of security until we lure them away from the woke and into our cult.
Well, here's the thing, Carlin, is that we might be in it right now. And
God,
in a sense,
I really am a cult leader.
Yeah, I mean, to think that we and everyone listening now, that we're the ones who are not in the cult, if there are like thousands of different viewpoints and we are the ones that are correct, would be egocentric of us. So we have to like allow for the idea that we are as culty as them and as wrong as them. And sneakily, I think by doing that, I think that we're actually better than them. But,
I think it's us holding ourselves to a little bit of a higher standard than they are, which I can feel morally superior about that. Yeah,
that's what it's about. Look, there are three. There's a guy I really like called Will Storr, also on my podcast. He talks about something called the status game, and he looks at like evolutionary tribes, and there are 3 ways that you can gain status. And status is really important, because if you've got status in your tribe, you get more of the food, and people share with you and that stuff. One is being dominant. So if you're just like a dominant alpha male, that's why more men tend to be sort of dominant, your Harvey Weinsteins and all that kind of thing. If you're dominant, it makes sense you're going to get lots of the food. You might not have to go hunting. You're like, you guys go, or Another is success, which I like. I think that's the cleanest way to like show off your virtue. It's like, I'm good at stuff. I invented the wheel. I invented fire. Please, share some food with me and I'll invent some more stuff for you. The third way is virtue. But you don't get more food by being more virtuous. You get more food by showing and convincing others that you are more virtuous. So that became a big thing. And it makes sense that it might happen among more women, but there are a lot of men nowadays. It's sort of equal. A lot of men are at it as well. Because if you can't be dominant, and maybe you weren't dominant at a younger age, or I don't know what, it makes sense that status and virtue is the way to go, so that it's your way of being dominant. Basically, that's what I think it is.
All right, I'm gonna be thinking about that one. Maybe it's time that I embrace my identity as a cult leader and just like own it.
Yeah,
I'm gonna change my Twitter profile right now to say Karlin Borisenko cult leader.
But what are you using for status? Do you think dominance, success, or
I'd
virtue?
say I'm pretty dominant.
Yeah,
I
fair
don't
enough.
know. Can I be a mix of all three?
Yeah.
Excellent. That's probably the best diversity of cult leader tactic.
Yeah, that's what it's about.